back up and hit a couple things from last week. Just make sure everybody's cool and clear with it. So, now that I've got all of these markers up here that are fresh, let's use them. Hey Kenny, good to see you, man. All right, so antenna. Okay, and it's a half wave antenna. Is that, what kind of antenna is that? Shout it out if you know. It's all good. Hey, I was on TV last night. I'm on TV again. Okay, that's a dipole, right? Yes. So, to find the length of the dipole from this point here to this point here, we have the formula. Anybody remember the formula? 468. Okay, so 468 over divided by N. Look at you, you read. She finally had to admit to me the other night, you know, Dad, I got to read this stuff eventually. All right, so for a half-wave dipole, it is 468 over frequency N. Everybody cool with that? It's okay, man.
Sorry, I was laughing because you were like, what's this? And I realized I looked down and it's right there.
Right there. You gotta love that. It's okay. Dude, you can chuckle if you need to. It's all good. All right, so on a dipole flat like that, we don't want to use those. Those are very difficult to couple to coax. So what did we talk about doing with a dipole last week? To lower that feed point impedance to get down to 50 ohms for our coax. Hold up. I know Delbert's not here and you got to be the class, champion, so just sit down. All right, guys, you want to venture a guess? Okay, so it's a good thing we're doing this tonight then. So we're going to take this same antenna and we're just going to bend the legs in it down, right? Remember the inverted V? Dude, you got notes. It's okay, the notes are right. All right, so the beauty of this, table, let's close this door because they're getting, the neighbors are getting loud. And besides that, we can now function in this room. It's cooler when we come in. All right, so the beauty of this is, now that feed point impedance right there at the connection point is 50 ohms. Okay? So that's just one of those cool things to know. The measurement is still the same. All we did was droop the ends. Okay, and yes, we can do it the opposite way. If we happen to have two tall trees, we can do what looks like a slingshot. It's just a V. Same thing. Upside down like this works really, really, really well. So if that is the formula for a dipole, by the way, my spelling is horrendous tonight. I'm sure you will find spelling errors. Please point them out. That way everybody doesn't write down the wrong spelling. Okay, if I want to build a vertical, actually those legs need to be a little longer. Okay, and I want to determine the length of the radiator from here to here. So this would be a quarter wave, and this is a vertical. Something like that. Fail. Crap. Don't be that light, is it? All right, I'm just going to leave a big V up there for vertical because I'm lazy. Okay, what's the number? Let's put in our formula. 234, half of 468. So if you go into that test and you can remember either 234 for a quarter wave or you can remember 468 for a half wave, you've got that solved. Okay? So a quarter wave antenna. Now, I had about 10 minutes to rummage through the fun stuff at the house. Every ham has a junk collection. So some vehicle, maybe back when Shelley was 3 had that mount on it, because that's a trunk-lip mount. And this is a 19-inch whip. Okay, so that right there is a quarter wave antenna at 2 meters, at 144 to 148 megahertz.
What's longer than 19 inches?
Got a measuring tape?
No.
Got it on the bill.
Okay. So you're going to take my word for it?
Yeah.
Take my word for it. I believe you're going to find that's probably 19.25 inches.
Longer.
It's going to be that kind of night, folks. Fasten your seatbelts. Okay. So same thing there. If we simply take a female connector, like is on the back of this antenna tuner, you could simply take that kind of connector and build you an antenna just by knowing those dimensions. Stuff up here on the table is kind of conversation pieces. Thought about it today, and it's like, you know, we did a lot of math last week. We talked a lot about things, and you're looking at them on flat paper. So why not bring something in you can look inside of and see how much dust I have in this stuff that I, keep hiding around the house. All right, so 234. Brand new markers. All right, 234. Same thing. Okay, so for 2 meters, that would be 144, or 234 divided by 144, and that'll come out to a little less than 2. And if you drive down into the fractions, you'll find out it's about 19 inches. Okay, all of that makes sense. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Folks, this is something you're going to use every day. It's on the test. You just need to make sure you know it.
If you can't remember both formulas, you just remember 468, just divide them into like this.
Well, that's what I said. If you remember either 234 or 468, you're good. One or the other. Okay. Stuff you're going to use every stinking day. Okay? Because when you need one, or when you want to buy one, or you want to put one on your car, you kind of need to know these things. Don't take what's in the ad on Amazon to be truthful. Do the math. And you will have that in a couple of weeks. I promise you. Okay, so in all of that, the other things that we covered last week, let's look at that list one more time. Okay. So we did the antenna basics. Anybody remember what VSWR is? It's probably in your notes. Bruce, actually I'm honored.
Voltage standing.
Wave ratio, exactly. So that's a product of basically how much is not being dissipated by our antenna, but being sent back down that coax back closer to our radio. Okay, just one of those things. I know there's a test question for what is VSWR. So that's one of those things you just kind of need to know. We talked about watt meters last week. I actually brought in one. This one has survived, a couple of decades with me, probably 3 by now. And it simply has a switch that selects how much power you're probably trying to measure, so you want to make sure you're on the right setting. And the other one simply just switches between forward and reversed. So this inline, I could have 50 watts forward, 10 watts reflected. Now it's not going to do all the math to get me that VSWR. But my reflected power needs to be as minimal as possible. So what I'm doing there, if I'm actually adjusting an antenna, is trying to find the frequency that dips at. Now while we're talking about that, let me talk about one other thing that we kind of need to cover. And I'm going to probably cover this every week, so just kind of get used to the thing. We're at the place where you've learned a lot, and you're getting ready to take a test. This is usually the point at which people start to buy radios because they're so enthused and they're so ready to go. When that license gets there, bam, I got it. Okay? Listen all you want. Please remember that if you don't have your license, you can't legally key it up. Okay? If you want to check and make sure your antenna is good, get with one of us hams after, a class or a club meeting. We'll be happy to legally transmit on that so we can test things for you. Soon you'll be able to do that. It's really not worth the fines and the aggravation if you're going to sit through the class to get all the way to the end and have somebody knocking on your door because you're illegally transmitting, okay? So just keep that in mind. That's on HF, on VHF, UHF, doesn't matter, okay? Please, I know it's tempting. You have to hang on a couple of more weeks and we'll be there, okay? So that's my public service announcement for the evening. So just know that, we try to keep this as pure as possible. That's why I talked about last week using the least amount of power we needed to make that connection. Remember we talked about that in class? Okay, that's how we police ourselves. We only use the power that we need to make a reliable contact. And what you'll find if you do that, if you live by that code, the rest of the hams will live by that code as well. And the bands are available for all of us to use. Okay, so we talked about the ionosphere and maximum usable frequency last week. Anybody got an idea what that's maybe about? The ionosphere does what for us? Bingo! It bounces our signals back. Some frequencies at different times of the day just pass on through and go out into space. Sometimes we want them to go out in space because we want to hit off of an object floating around in space and have them bounce back to us. So the ionosphere is that protective dome that makes radio propagation possible. Okay? How about this? How about if you're up in VHF or UHF, and because a weather front comes through, you can now, for a little while, hear a station and talk to a station way far away. Anybody want to venture a guess on what that phenomenon is called? It's 2 words. I'll even give you the second word. No, I won't. Tyler?
You want me to answer it?
Sure.
Are we talking about skywave propagation?
No. Remember we talked about a little path opening up because of a front that comes through? It's up there in the ionosphere. It's another sphere. Got one for me?
Oh, no.
Okay, that's
All
okay.
I think of is really cool. It's 2 words, but they don't work.
Okay, good. Okay, I'll help you out with this one. Ducting was the last word. The first word was tropospheric. Okay? What happens is we get a warm front, we have warm air and we have cold air, and they collide in a nice long, especially those fronts that move through and the seasons change up the East Coast, and they run kind of parallel to the coast. You can get an opening, and I have sit in my driveway in town on a little walkie-talkie, simplex, so I wasn't going through a repeater, and talked to a guy in Graham Island. Didn't last but about 35 minutes that night.
It can last 2 minutes, it can last an hour.
Yeah, and we don't know when it's going to pop up, but it's cool as all get out, because if the guy showed up on the repeater and was, on 015, our big repeater out on the big TV tower. And, it's like, dude, where are you at? And then somebody had the balls to go, I wonder if I can hear him on the input. So we moved over to 146.52, which is the national simplex frequency. So, hey, you got to meet us at 652? He goes, sure. Clicks over there. We chatted for another, 15 minutes or so. There are cool opportunities. It's kind of like when we did the first week and I was pointing out King Hussein of Jordan. Field day. I got to talk to King Hussein. Yeah, you don't often get to do that in the Western Hemisphere. Over there, you probably only do that if, he sentences you to, well, anyway, he's dead now. So, point being, there's lots of opportunity, lots of cool stuff that happens. You just kind of have to be there for it. Okay?
Hey, Sam,
Sir.
I was going to kick in a point. Our radar sites in Germany, our tactical radar sites, they were too close together for HF, too far away for VHF. We had troposcatter. Relay points. Look like dishes, look like microwave dishes, intentionally focused on doing it by troposphere. And by the way, the key point on the test is weather. You can see the word weather.
Weather. Because weather is going to set this up. If it's dry or it's crap or hot, it blazes out here, and nothing's standing, the air ain't stirring, it ain't happening. But the spring and fall, man, it can get real fun. Okay, so let's see, anything else left over from last night? Last week we talked connectors and stuff. I've got some stuff up here, in the breaks or after tonight. Definitely will, talk to you about it, show you what those connectors look like. Talk coax if we need to talk coax. Tonight we need to dive into some really cool things like modulation and bandwidth. So the first thing I'm going to start with, when I say the word CW, when I use that term, CW, does anybody know what that is?
Primary for Morse code.
Yeah, it's Morse code or carrier wave. So I remember the transmitter we did a couple of weeks ago where we had the key, and we had and all we did was turn the thing on and off. Okay? So, everybody know what Morse code sounds like? Yes? Yeah. Wait a minute, George's going to demonstrate that?
Maybe.
Okay, well, I'll draw something while you're doing that. Evening, Ed.
How you doing?
Good, bro. All right, so, well, it's not.
Maybe not, the hospital might not.
Failed. Okay, so. I don't know what this is.
Right, but they working.
Okay, well, it happens. All right, so we look at, if you want to follow along with me, if you will look at page 5-2. Now, it's going to feel like we're skipping around a little bit. Some of the order in this is splitting things that I don't want to draw twice. So we're going to talk about some things and get them all together, okay? So if we're looking at it, we have okay. So basically, when we key that transmitter, we just have a signal, a carrier coming up. Okay? So let's say that's at, and I'm just going to use some real simple math, even though it's not, well, you know what, let's say that. So 7.2, okay, that's that carrier turning on and off. That's the da-da-da-did, okay? It turning on and off. The length of a dit is, or a dit, is a third of a da, right? Tell you what, I passed it in 1980.
I'm studying it right now.
I had absolutely no desire to do anything with it. So I do not run code. There's lots of fun if you find that enjoyable, you will have a ball on ham radio because there's a ton of old people in really remote destinations that would love to talk to you. Not for me. Okay, so we have that carrier coming on and off.
Like Dalzell.
Yeah, like that. Right. Okay, so let's do something a little different. And I'm going to try to do this in 2-color. Okay, see how symmetrical I can be tonight. Hey, not bad. Okay. So, just pretend all of those are the same width. Okay, so in this, we're taking that carrier wave and we're modulating it with audio, okay? So what we end up with, if this is just simple CW, then this is AM. Okay, if the carrier is still inside that, the audio is riding on it, modulating. So all we have to do on the receiver end is extract the carrier information out, and what's left is the audio that we started with. Okay? So in this, so what this really looks like, if CW is only going to look like that one spike coming up and going away, one spike up, going away. But based on the maximum frequency inside this AM envelope, okay, will determine what our stuff looks like out here. So I'm just going to simplify it. I'm not really going to draw it out. Okay. One half goes up, one half goes down. One goes down, one goes up. So now we're looking at what's called bandwidth. Okay? So, distance from here to there, boy, I really did that bad. Hey, that's gonna bother me. From there to there, span width. Okay? Bandwidth is very important. Okay? So this area over here is our upper side band. Information down here is our lower side band. Okay? What's above the carrier and what's below the carrier in AM. So, this allows us to do some interesting tricks. Okay? If I'm tuning on a receiver, that's Morse code. Okay, brought an HF rig in from the house. It's pretty dusty because I use HF about never. Although that's always on my list of projects every year to actually get that radio hooked up in an antenna in the air. The antenna's in the air now. The radio's still not been hooked up. But my cat loves it. Actually, my grandcat. He thinks it's really nice because when it's really warm, the metal chassis is actually kind of cool, so he crawls up on it and goes, yeah, this feels pretty good, Dad. Okay, so in this, we can do a couple of cool radio stupid pet tricks. If AM has the same information in the upper sideband and the lower sideband of it, I can do a couple of tricks. If I want to maximize the number of people that can talk on a given band, if my bandwidth is wide, well, I'm just eating up spectrum. But for the usable part of the voice, I can get rid of, let's see, because I had to think about which one I want to get rid of, guys. I can get rid of one because it's a mirror image. Well, if I can do that, guess what? I can suppress that carrier. Let me use a different color here. Okay? Because when I receive it, I can reinsert that carrier. Okay? Decode half of the audio and create a mirror image of it. So now I get to listen to half of the bandwidth and still have all the same information. Kind of cool, isn't it? Because now two people can have two different conversations in the same amount of spectrum. Everybody with me? That kind of makes sense. Okay? So, some of you may be wondering, and I didn't cover this and I should have. Well, if that carrier is turning on and off, where's the audio come from? We have a little device inside the radio. It's called a beat frequency oscillator. It hears that carrier come up and down, and adds a side tone to it that we can hear. So that's where the boop, boop, boop comes from. The carrier is turning on and off. That's causing the Morse code, the CW. In our receiver, we're taking, really cool pet tricks here and creating sound that we can use and determine and actually, understand what they're trying to send. Kind of makes sense? Book's got a lot of good stuff in there. You can read the book. I'm just giving you another way to think about this to help you merge the gap. Okay? So, anything below that's a new mark. Come on, man. Yeah, I'm gonna tell Walmart they suck. All right, let's try the fruity color here. So below. Yeah, no, doesn't smell like strawberries. HF guys, check me. Make sure I don't mess this up, because I have to think about it and look at a band plan. That's right, isn't it, George?
I think so.
Yeah, thank you.
I think the break is 10 over.
I found good arguments. Some say it's 14.
Yeah.
Okay. 10, maybe 14. Okay. Band plan I'm going to give you here in a minute is going to help you. Above 10 or whatever. Use as I don't know that that is hard and fast rules, or if that is a gentleman's agreement that is ran forever.
It's a gentleman's agreement.
Okay, so there's one in your book, and it's not as colorful. So I decided to waste some good toner today. Because when we're talking about bandwidth, this is that page that's in between chapters 1 and 2. That one. Well, I'm going to refer to this one, so I'll give you a copy of this one.
Oh, I'm just trying to look over here.
Oh, I forgot, you're actually learning things.
Trying to.
George, just for your wisdom and knowledge. Okay, so I'm gonna skip FM for just a second. I'm gonna take you over another page. Take a look at the table on 5-5. Okay. 5-5 has a signal bandwidth table. Okay. So if you notice, CW is only 150 hertz wide. Okay. Single sideband. Let's not think about digital right now, let's think about voice. 2 to 3 kilohertz in width. All right, so we pull out our handy dandy little chart. And let's look at 20 meters. Okay, and this is above the grade license you're going for, but let's just use 20. Okay, so voice starts, that's that for the extra classes. The schnobs in here that are extras. I know. I can't resist. On 20 meters, the band edge starts at 14,150. Everybody see that and agree with it? If you look at the orange there at the top of the 20 meter band, right past the big triple red bar, there's like 2 whites with a yellow on top of it that says 14,150. Everybody there? Okay. What happens? Okay. I'm going to go clean my chart up. I'm going to clean this up for a second, and then we'll reload it. So we said 14,150, right? Okay. So if my sideband information, if my suppressed carrier would be there, and my information is out here, can I operate right on the edge of that band at 14,150? If I'm using upper sideband? Thought-provoking question. Is there any energy down here below 14,150? There's not. So could I get away with it? Maybe. Is my radio dead on 14,150? Okay. I'm not willing to take that chance. So I can tell you, because it's me, I'm going to cover my butt, and I'm probably going to adjust up to 153 as a minimum. Agree with that one, Mark?
I think they recommended in the book even a little higher.
Probably 5.
160, I think.
Okay. If you're, depending on the age of your rig, if you've got an older rig, the oscillator's not as accurate as or as stable, but you really can't go below 153. So if you go below 153, you haven't protected the edge of that band. So I kind of like the safety factor of changing that 3 to at least 55 or 160 if you want to be be safe.
And he's saying safety factor because if you transmit out of band, you take a chance of losing your license.
Yeah,
And most of us work real hard, like you're doing,
okay.
to get our license. We don't want to lose it.
I'm gonna sit down for half a second to make this statement because this is profound. Not really, I just need to sit down for a second. Keep in mind, all of these frequencies that we're granted is all part of an international agreement between every country. Okay? Because the frequencies that are made available to us, they go outside of our borders. Okay? Where we may not have anything below that frequency that we have to protect other than the space left for Morse code, the CW chunk of the band. In a neighboring country, it may actually be something more, important to them. So don't think that just because I may drift out of the band a little bit, that it will not be noticed. It will be noticed. So we're given the spectrum, we have to honor the spectrum, we have to stay inside our licensed spectrum. There's plenty of it. Okay, so make sure that on the low end and the high end, you protect yourself. And for this illustration, I will change the frequency to now 14,350. Are we operating legally or not legally?
Illegal,
Why?
because you're above the band.
I'm outside the limits of the band. And you'll notice in this chart, there are different sections depending on your class of license. Okay? I'm a general class hand. I have privileges that are only so wide. George is an extra because George has passed more tests than I have because I have a day job. No, I'm kidding. It's in my bucket list. Quite frankly, the only difference between a general and an extra is a little bit of spectrum on HF, on different bands. And if I had time to play with HF, like these guys that have their extras, man, I'd want that spectrum.
We do get the telemetry option to go to sell that too.
Yeah. Dish network works, so I really don't need telemetry on satellite. But anyway, point being, guys, just because the bandage says, doesn't mean I can go there. So let's take this to our 2-meter handy-talkies, our walkie-talkies for 2 meters. 144 to 148, yeah, it'll do it. So if you go to 2 meters and look for, if you look down at 144.0 to 144.1, it's red. What is that?
CW.
Morse code, CW. Okay? So I can't talk on a radio on 144 using FM. Because A, I'm not supposed to be there at that freak. Now, if I get up higher, if I'm up in the, above 0.3, 144.3, I'm good. Okay? But keep in mind there's a lot of repeater pairs in there. So if you're down there operating, you want to make sure you're not on the input to somebody's repeater, because you can very easily end up there. All right, so we talked about AM and we talked about CW. All right, let's do a little twist on this. Okay, so I'm going to put my carrier back up here. Okay, and I'm going to say this is at 146 megahertz. Okay, now that part of the band is FM. Okay. I'll take you to the, give me a second, I'll find you the chart. Oh, it's at the top of 5-4. Remember before all all of our carrier has been steady at a given frequency. Okay, so now in this, we're going to have, okay, we're modulating the frequency. We're swinging the center frequency of the radio. Okay, that's FM. Okay, so if this is my center frequency, I may occupy a lot of space. Okay, basically the trash that you see down here. So instead of my bandwidth is kind of turned a little different because I'm frequency modulating, and I end up with a product called spell check. Good. Deviation. Think of it just like modulation, okay? Except we're swinging a carrier. We're deviating from that center frequency. Okay? So we have a couple of things at play here. We start talking about the width of this. So if this is minus 12.5 and plus 12.5, our total deviation is, oh, I forgot to put something up here that would probably help you. Even though this is wider than we ever operate. Anybody want to guess what my deviation is? The sum of the two. So if I'm swinging that far, 12.5 up, 12.5 down, this is 25 kilohertz deviation. Okay? Because sometimes I equate things to broadcast stations. There's a little hidden secret inside of this. Our maximum frequency in audio, we find a new audio flavor here. Let's find a new audio flavor of the day. Let's use red. My audio is going to be probably on the low end. Oh, that's the one I said didn't work. I may leave that one for the hospital. It'll be worth aggravating somebody else after I'm gone. Let's try this red. Maybe this one likes me. Okay, so we'll probably start about 20 hertz to, anybody want to guess? Tim, don't answer this.
Audio range, audio hearing range.
Audio range. Talking hertz.
20 hertz.
Actually, no. That's 12.5. Okay. So to get broadcast quality audio, we have a really wide carrier. Okay. It takes up a good 40 kilohertz. Okay. Just for you to be able to hear the little ting of the cymbals. So your deviation is the maximum RF deviation. Your maximum audio is half that. I lean that same way with sample rate, Tim. If you play with digital audio any, whatever your sample rate is, so on a compact disc it's 44.1 kilohertz. Your best audio reproduction out of that is 20.5 or 20.6. Anyway, just those are fun things. The big thing you need to note in this is amplitude modulation modulates, the audio is modulating the carrier. Okay, so you have envelopes. Okay. There is a product, a byproduct of doing that is peak envelope power. Okay? So when we talk about our power, if this is our power coming out of the radio, fully keyed, well, then our peak envelope power here is actually at these points. And up there, that red in the middle kind of shares. Okay? So our peak envelope power is probably more than our average power. In all cases, it will be. Okay, so when we're judging antennas and connectors and coax and stuff, if we're doing single sideband or we're doing double sideband AM, which is all it is two sidebands AM, your peak power can be a lot higher than you think it is. Probably 1.5 times more. Okay, let's keep that in mind. But on FM, our power is constant because we're varying the frequency. Okay, does that make any sense? Okay, this is just stuff you kind of need to know because, you know, this also explains why, if we have wide deviation, our audio quality is better when we're listening to FM as opposed to AM. Because AM, we're capped at about 3 kilohertz on the broadcast for a 6 kilohertz broadcast channel. Okay, so narrow band, wide band. You'll see buttons on the radio that say narrow. You have filters in the radios. What a filter does is kind of interesting. Okay, a filter, let's see, I don't know if that one's going to work real well. Let's choose the green. A filter, Tim, does that green work on? No? Okay, well let's take that and have a play. The red worked, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so if we're building a filter, let's make us some space here. Get rid of this audio stuff. Hey, we become creatures of habit. In all our drawings at work, audio is always red. So I naturally just grab the red pen. The filter is going to have, if this is the center frequency here, it's going to have skirts to the lower side and to the higher side. Now what a filter does is a filter shapes the audio that we let through. Or if it's a filter in an antenna system or a combining system, it's set up duplexers. A filter narrows that group of frequencies that can pass through it. So if I take a filter, let me refix this up here, and we'll go to 14 point something. What's in the band? 14.2? Anyway, even if it's not. Okay, and I have this lower sideband here and this upper sideband here. If I insert a filter, I could do something silly like this. Okay? What that does is any other extraneous noise outside of that, I'm ignoring. I don't let it get to my speaker. I can actually do that. I can narrow that up as narrow as I want, even to, like 200 hertz wide for a very narrow CW filter. Okay? You can go back and look. There have been some pretty esoteric rigs built that narrow that to where you can tune that CW you're listening to, inject that filter, and all the trash on either side of it goes away. And that is a filter. Okay, so your radios are going to have filter buttons. Sometimes some filters may be labeled noise blinker. Okay, that's in your text. But basically it's a filter. It's a filter built to do a specific function. Okay, so let's take my wide voice filter out of this. And we'll go back to just my CA. And I can build a filter that looks kind of like this. Okay? Only the stuff inside the middle of that's going to pass. All we're doing is limiting range. So when you think filter, just like you would filter water in a water pitcher, we're filtering that signal. Okay, so that's the easiest way to remember this. We can do that. That's usually when I find out all the kids in the class because they start giggling with the drawings. Okay? Glad you're not here tonight. Never mind. Some of the kids that work for me. All right, so we know the AM, double side band, wide carrier, right? CW, just a vertical. FM, we're changing that frequency, so all of our waves are uniform height, and all they do is swing back and forth as far as width to give us audio. We can do all of these same technologies by inserting a digital signal in them. And the only thing changes is this becomes ones and zeros instead of audio frequency. Even on some things in the ham band, we digitize and actually turn to AFSK, audio frequency shift keying, to where we're putting two tones in and creating things. Like RTTY, RIDI. That was the old teletype method for us. If you remember the old teletype machines, I actually had a Model 26 at the house. You turn it on, you couldn't hear the TV because it's going, you know, the neighbors knew when I was running RIDI growing up. That's what we had, because this thing called a computer, well, we read about those in Popular Electronics. Everybody good with this? Good day? Good. Okay. So Phil's sick tonight, so Tim's recording this. We hope to have it up in the usual place sometime soon. All right. So let's talk about receivers and transmitters. We've talked about that before, right? Yeah, all analog all the time. Nothing like a whiteboard. It's really good for you guys that I'm limited to one whiteboard. 20th Bomb Squadron had to learn the hard way. Did a presentation for them one day. Fortunately, I was in a big assembly hall and I had a wall. Had 3 new boxes of markers, and we threw things away really quick. So let's talk about the block diagrams of things again. So our antenna, right? Antenna, kind of, sort of. You do that if you like. So we have a receiver, we have a transmitter, and we have a little box in the middle called a T/R switch. Antenna comes in here, that goes that way, and this goes that way, and that goes both ways. Okay? Y'all remember that from before? Okay? So, when we're looking at our spectrum, again, and I've got my carrier for CW, all I basically have is a little key out here. You know, it's got this little brass skewer on it, and a trap there, and then that goes there. That's the simplest of Morse code keys you'll ever find. It's basically shorting 2 pins together. Okay, what does it do? It turns that transmitter on and off, right? So we have our carrier here. It's running on and off. Simple as it goes. That is a holdover from the old telegraph system, where all they were doing was putting the voltage on a wire. Okay? Morse code's been around forever, and quite honestly, if the world really comes to an end, there'll still be somebody running CW, you know, as the thing falls out of orbit. I promise you. That'll be George. Actually, we got a lot of old guys at the club that are really, really good at this. And, you know, they will always have somebody to talk to, because there will still be some other old codger hanging out, you know, while the planet's, you know, tumbling through the, you know.
Be big and formal.
Huh?
Be big and formal.
Yeah, we deliver for the pea-picking farmer, the man who turned me on to Chinese food. Yeah, Lord, that's been history.
There's a legend that Jimmy Fallon had a couple of teenagers texting, competing against a couple of old guys.
Yeah.
CW and the CW guys.
The guys outran him.
This guy we're talking about here, Pete Dick Palmer, he was a fellow at the Shaw Air Force Base several years back.
Oh, yeah.
And he would ride down in his car, and he'd be talking on 2 meters on the microphone, and keying a CW keyer on his lap while he's driving.
You missed the one on the gear shift.
Morse code conversation.
You missed the keyer on the gear shift.
Oh, yeah, he had one.
That was a 4-speed little itty bitty rice grinder, and he'd run down the road shifting gears. You know,
He's running 30
killing
miles
it.
a minute.
Yeah. Harry was an F-16 crew chief,
Yeah.
and probably the best that Shaw had for a long period of time. Last time I heard, he was a sheriff in some.
The Southern Sheriff in
Yeah.
Georgia.
No, I think it was Alabama.
Alabama.
Yeah, he was a Bama boy. But anyway, those guys, I tell you what, it's something to listen to. When you get a radio and you can sit there and listen to the speed of some of this. If you listen close, you can tell the stuff that's being sent by a machine, it's being sent by a computer. And then you hear the stuff that's got a little bit of a draw to it at times. That's those old guys sitting there. Some of them are pounding it out on brass, some of them sitting there with a paddle. And what the paddle does, one paddle does a dip, the other one does a dot. So they're just sitting there, and it's timed to where you hit one side of the keyer, it's a dip, the other side is a dot. And like I said, Harry used to drive down the road, and I don't recommend this, but he's sitting there flying down the road at about 25, 30 words a minute, shifting gears, talking on another radio at the same time. How he could do that, I don't know. Harry's an old friend with a lot of good war stories. All right, so that's the key. We take that out and put a microphone in here. Yeah. Something like that. Okay. Now we're going to modulate this with voice. Right? Okay. So with this, if we do AM, we got our side bands, upper and lower, because it's double sideband or amplitude modulation. So on the receive side, we have to have a receiver, okay, that has a tuning freak, a tuning frequency there that we match that carrier. These two things track together in a radio that's all in one. If you really want to experience craziness, get a set of old Drake twins, to where you have independent frequency control of your receiver and your transmitter, and you pray you're somewhere close and you're talking to the guy you think you're talking to. Okay, so our receiver sees the same image of that signal over there. Okay, so what do we have to do to be able to turn this into audio? Okay, we go RX, then we got a block there where we have to talk about, right? So the receive goes in there, comes out there to the speaker. Anybody want to guess what we have to do in an AM signal? I can tell you we're going to put DE in front of something. Right, demodulate, because if we modulate that carrier over here, to undo it, I've got to have a demodulator. So I've got to take this and I've got to decode it and demodulate it and turn it back into audio, right? Okay? All receivers are going to do that. It's a long, arduous process for how you get there inside with all the circuitry, but the reality of this is you're still going to demodulate a signal. Okay? Real simple. Okay? So, let's simplify this drawing a little bit, and I'm going to put all of this inside a container. We're going to call this our radio or our transceiver. Okay? So, if I turn, okay, guess I'll go back to black here. So if I did this, and let's say that point there, and that point there were variable. Okay? That's the same as me sitting here tuning, spinning this knob on the radio. That's my main tuning knob. The receiver tracks together with the transmitter. Okay? So now those are connected. Makes sense? That one follows the other? Novel idea. We may actually be able to listen to the people we're talking to if they follow together. If they come apart, I got a problem. So in your little cute little handheld radios, this is just given. But we have to illustrate it out. So there is a function in some receivers called RIT. Anybody want to venture a guess what RIT is? Let's see. I know it's on here. There it is. I got actually two knobs on this one. So you can come up and look at this during the break. There's one called RIT and one XIT. So if we're going to do that, let's do that too. Let's put in the corner of this XIT. Right, any thoughts for anybody? It is a tuning function. That's receive incremental tuning and transmit incremental tuning. Okay, best way to put this, and it's most easy to explain, and I'm going to pick on some of the old people that I occasionally listen to and find great fun in listening to. There is an old guys group that works on 3898. Okay? Okay, you HF guys, correct me if I screw this up. Okay? What you'll find is there may be a dozen old men sitting there yakking. If you're dead on 3898, most of them are going to be right there. There's going to be one guy, always one. And he's going to be you agree with that, George? Always going to be one guy that's off. It's going to be close. So what you'll end up listening to is 3898, 11 of the 12 sound like humans. Every time he gets on, he sounds like Darth Vader with a big case of laryngitis. Or Donald Duck. So what we can do is we can hit this little button in our radio, and I'm just going to bring that down, okay? And we can offset R, O, U, R, U, R, R, X, 3.
No, then you tune all the other guys off.
Okay, so, hang on.
Hang on.
There's a button to turn it on and off on most radios. So if you do this every weekend, you know Fred's going to be a little low. Go ahead and just find Fred a sweet spot, turn the RIT on, receive incremental tuning, and find Fred a little spot. And that way, every time he keys up, you turn that incremental tuning on, and now suddenly he sounds like he's human. And then punch it back out for everybody else. These are tricks, folks. You could do the same thing with the main tuning knob on the radio. You'll just sit there all conversation, rocking back and forth. Okay? Same way on the transmit side. Let's say that Fred's rig is just off frequency completely. All you guys sound screwed up tonight. Okay, well then I can take the XIT button, do the same thing, and shift my transmit up or down a little bit. It's all about keeping people happy. George?
Anybody in here ever mess with CBs? You ever mess with single sideband CBs? There's a button called a clarifier.
Clarifier.
Single sideband CB. That's the same
Same
thing.
exact circuit. And all it does is take care of people that their gear may not necessarily be doing exactly what it says it is. Remember, this is amateur, it is a hobby. Okay? That's why we put those functions on it. This is an antenna tuner that I actually sold on eBay. UPS decided to turn it into a nice prop. So I had to refund the guy's money. You can see that if I spin this conductor around, you notice that part of the back of the knob is missing. The thing actually works. Cosmetically, it looks like it got hit by a car. But on the inside, you can actually see when we talk about durable capacitors, you can actually sit there and rotate that and watch the little vanes turn around in it. So it's a cool little talking point. I brought an HF rig tonight just because a lot of the buttons and functions we're talking about now, we're going to finish talking about here in a few minutes, are on this radio. So if you want to see them, touch them, feel them, smell them, whatever, just don't lick them. You know, kind of like lickophobia on that. We talked about dummy loads last week, right? We'll pass that around. Grab it. So because I don't like to hold heavy things when I'm talking, I brought a baby for me to illustrate with. So what you'll notice as this bad boy comes around, that there's a connector in one end of it. That one has a female connector that's actually one you can replace. This one's machined into it. So there's a big resistor on the inside of this that happens to be 50 ohms. All of this aluminum structure around it is heat sink. And the reason for that is something's got to dissipate that heat. So yeah, that's my get out of jail free card right there, because if I need to hook a radio up to a service monitor, I'm dumping all the power in there and keying it wide open. So if you're going to measure power, you got to measure it into a dummy load. You know, you got to sit and check deviation on the radio. You're going to have a dummy load for it to go into, because you can't do the testing on there. It's kind of like I was talking about earlier, keying up. You don't want to disturb people. So that's why we have dummy loads. Shelly's dropped that on her toe probably once in her life.
What's the value? 1,500, 3,000?
No, that's, no, I think that is conservatively rated at a couple of hundred watts for UHF.
Okay.
That one will go to a gigahertz at about 200 watts. This little guy, just for comparison, is 25 watts at 800. And you may wonder, why are we talking 800? Well, there's a lot of 800 stuff used by police and law enforcement and fire departments and stuff that I may have built for this thing. So, toys from the old days. You know, got some connectors up here so you can kind of see what the connectors are. Just brought a couple random cables. Big blue handle things are crimp tools. Because one of the best ways to put a connector on, right, Bruce? This is one of the first tools I showed Bruce how to use in ham radio. How to crimp a connector. And please don't open the bag, I'll just pass that around in the tool. So, lots of people don't solder well. So the world decided to create for us crimp-on connectors, which is beautiful. They come in small and large. That same connector that's running around is actually a PL259. Pass that one around. That's the baby one for the mobile coax, the small stuff. This next little one in the bag is a BNC connector. That connects to a lot of the portable radios. So last week I was hoping to stop and pick this stuff up at the house before I come when I was talking about all that stuff. Best thing to do with those crimpers is don't try to put your finger in it and see how it feels. Because that will exert probably 400 to 500 pounds of force.
I've got red handles, does that make mine better?
Those come as a match set from RF Industries, George. I think the pair of these, when I bought them or when a company that I may have worked for at the time bought them, you know, I don't know, they were probably $150 a set back then.
You can get a crimp set for PL259s like that. It's got that crimper, it's got two coax stripping tools, and a cutter,
Yeah,
and a screwdriver.
yeah. I mean, the tools have come down greatly. Just know this. Know what kind of connector you're using and buy the crimp tool for it, because the dies, you can see that the replacement jaws up in here. This is kind of an educational moment. These jaws up in here that actually do the crimping are built for the diameter of the crimp ring. So it's very important that you have the proper die set to crimp. So if I had brought all of my crimp tools for different cables, we would have covered this table, probably filled it up.
Amazon's got a great crimping set that come with 2 additional.
Right, die sets, right. So I have these, and then I have the bigger ones to do other things. I have the smaller ones to do little tiny things. You can never have too much of this stuff. You know, he who dies with the most crap wins. Exactly. And as we've lost a couple of family members, Shelley can attest, sometimes it's not good to be that one that inherits all the crap and has to deal with it. Okay, so one of the test questions, believe it or not, is what's the fastest way to get to a favorite frequency? When we're talking buttons on the radio. Some of these have little memory, you can like save your favorite. So when they ask you what's the button to get you to your favorite, remember? I mean, it's so simple, but yet it's a stinking test question. Okay, so this is a test question, and I'm going to throw it back out because we talked about it a while ago. So, if I am on let's not use 14. Let's use 21. Help me, George. 15 meters, 21. Use your own cheat sheet, son.
21,275.
Okay. I am using blank. Is that upper or lower? Okay. Promise you this is one of those test questions you may have to memorize. Above 10 megahertz, it's upper. Below 10 megahertz, it's lower. Okay. I throw that back out because I promise you, this is stuff, it's going to be on the test, and if you do nothing but keep your technician class license the rest of your life, you will never use it. Unless you get into 2 meter or 440 or 438 sideband, 432 sideband.
Even if you go up to extra and play with HF, but maybe frequencies you don't mess with much, so you don't know.
Exactly. So just remember, it's upper, above. Okay. We're going to catch all this stuff again when we do review in a couple of weeks, because what I want to do is go soup to nuts that last night before the test, and let's just go through the test questions and talk about why. Okay, because this is a lot to get. This is a lot together. All right. Make sure I've covered all my modulations. Okay, there is, believe it or not, a test question. What type of modulation is most commonly used for VHF and UHF voice repeaters? This is a trick question from the word go, folks. It's all FM. Okay? It's FM. But they're going to ask you stuff like that. And the reason that they have to ask you stuff like that is we've got to have enough things to ask you to make up a test. A lot of this stuff, the theory isn't that deep, but they have to ask test questions. All right, so selecting band, frequency, and mode. So if I say the word select, what's the first thing that pops in your mind? What kind of device would select something? How about a switch? Could be a button. The button latches. If I touch it and it stays in that mode, it's just acting like a switch. Okay, so my upper sideband, my lower sideband, or my CW and my FM are all going to be buttons. On this one, they're called mode keys right there. You just select what you're using. Old radios, you may have to go click, click. Okay?
SDRs will be on the screen.
I'm sorry, what now?
SDR radios will be on the screen.
Yeah, hang on to SDR because that's one of the things we have to talk about in a minute. Because technology is so freaking fabulous. Okay? The bandwidth of things, we table 5-1, remember we talked about it earlier. What's the width of things? That is on 5.5 page number. Okay, it's up there right against the margin in the book, in the middle, in the binding. That's important stuff because there's a reason for you to know it outside the test, and that is making sure you're operating inside your spectrum or your allowed spectrum. If you don't know how wide your signal is, you're not going to know how close you can get to the sides. Okay, so There's a couple of those. If you're gonna operate CW, that's really, really narrow. If you're gonna operate on sideband, that's a little wider. If you're operating FM, that's a lot wider. Okay, so I'm gonna back up and cover something that I didn't cover a while ago. Remember we were talking, let me make some space. Because this is one of those things that I just kind of have to cover. Okay, so we talk about bandwidth. Okay, this is FM. Okay. So in bandwidth for FM, most of the ham stuff is 20 kilohertz. Okay. Sometimes referred to as 25 if they start talking about channel spacing between things. So our bandwidth is 20, but where our channel spacing for that is 25 kilohertz. Because I have 5 kilohertz guard on either side of it. Okay, everybody kind of understand the guards? Okay, so if my spectrum is here and all my set information is here, okay, I have to leave, you know, this is the channel markers there. So let's find a loud color. This space here and this space here protects me from my neighbor. Okay, that's the guard space. That's the space I have to leave vacant. So I can only use, out of a 25 kilohertz channel, I can only use 20 kilohertz inside it. Your radios do this for you automatically, but there's a certain amount of buyer beware in here. You kind of need to know what the box does. Okay, so I see some confused looks. Okay, let me speak it again, and if you need me to clarify something, please stop me because I want you to understand this point. My bandwidth may only be 20 kilohertz, but my channel spacing, in other words, this repeater to the next repeater, how close can the next guy be to me? And the answer to that is 25 kilohertz apart. Okay? Now we have a little different one, because when you get into commercial radios today, or you get into other amateur modes, especially DMR, okay, this channel goes to 12.5 kilohertz. Okay, so that's going to be what, 12 and a half, around 15-ish.
One way to do what Tom was saying here is, some of you guys that have played with CB radios, you've heard guys get on there with amplifiers and they start bleeding over the other channels.
Yeah.
What they call bleeding over. He's going out of those safety zones and into other channels. That's what
Okay.
we're talking about here.
So what happens in this, I'll draw this little guy underneath it, is where those were originally there, they're now here. And this is my information here. So now my guards are out here. Okay? So what I've done is I've decreased my deviation. My maximum deviation went from 25 kilohertz, or 20 kilohertz, really for the audio spectrum, down to 12 and a half. So what happens if my width of my signal shrinks by half? What did I gain? Whole nother channel. I would have also accepted crappy audio, because you'll notice the newer commercial radios, the ones that are 12 and a half kilohertz channels, since the rebanding that went on about, what, 10 years ago or so? Yeah, you have to use less spectrum. Remember when we talked a while ago about maximum deviation? Okay, and our deviation, if it was what was I doing a while ago? I was doing, so broadcast FM was greater than 40 kilohertz wide to give me 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz so I could hear the tinkling cymbals. But when you get down here, my maximum frequency for audio then is just above what's considered a human voice range at 3 kilohertz.
Radio spectrum actually has monetary value.
It does. It's been monetized since the beginning of time.
And when they revamp, when they drop down this frequency like you're saying, channelizing, they're creating more money.
Right.
More channels.
And in this, there is some ham stuff that is narrowband, digital mobile radio. Okay. The reason there is because all of the new commercial equipment that come out has to meet the commercial 12.5 kilohertz standard. So why not use that for ham stuff? So the hams adopted it. So what happens is, and I guess as good a time as any to do this to you. So let's do this to you. So we have decided we can look at things in frequency, and if we're going to look at, we can look at all the RF stuff in frequency, but we can also look at it in time. Okay? So if this is time, okay, I can take this carrier and create time slots. As long as it has a synchronizing signal, I can create time slots. So blue is going to be one, red is going to be another. So I'm going to create time slot 1. Okay. Which is followed by time slot 2. And on. It's going to be time slot 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, all the way down. With a synchronizing signal from a repeater that sets the timing for this, I can time slot things. What would time slotting do for me? Go for it, Tom.
It allows you to have multiple conversations going off on the same time at the same frequency.
Well, you're almost there because you said same time. Time is what we're screwing with here. Okay, so it's not exactly at the same instance. What we've done is we've compressed, we've taken a product called a vocoder, and we've listened to our audio and we've created a 1s and 0 bit stream. So what that allows us to do is then take and slice off that time that the radio is keyed into time slots. Okay, so doing this allows me to put 2 different conversations, 2 different groups of people talking on the same frequency, on the same radio, the same repeater system, at the same time. And all I've done is split them to where transmitter 1 keys up for a certain amount of time because the synchronizing signal that keeps everybody in check says, this is time, you're at time plus this. Okay, you have to be off by this period because that's George talking. Okay? So this is constantly happening. This technology has been around for a long time.
Something was.
It's how, what'd you say, trunking?
Basically.
Depends on, if I'm doing DMR trunking, yes. Okay. How about the cell phone? Ever thought about the cell phone? Okay. So, AT&T, farmers here is AT&T essentially.
Yeah.
It's TDMA.
Yeah.
So what we've created is, let's go back to black so we pick this up in the video good. TD, I'm glad to use my initials. Time. DIVISION, time division, TIP, this is a long day, guys. Time division mobile access. And all I'm doing there is I'm breaking up an RF carrier in time. Has to be a digital signal, cannot do it with analog. So our phones have a vocoder in them. Our DMR radios have a vocoder, and basically anything that we do to one side, we have to undo on the other side, right? Okay? So what we find there is on a cell phone, we perfected this at a little company called Nextel. We were doing a 3, 2, 1 interleave. And you don't need to write all this down, because this is, trust me, and T-E-R-L-E-V. Okay, so what we found is that we could break a carrier up into, and I'm not going to do different colors. I could do, so that's 3, we do 4, 5, and Mr. 6 is out there, just trust me. Okay? We could break it up into 6 time slots. Wow! I can pack 6 calls on one channel. All I'm doing is carving out time. Okay? What we found for cellular was that this guy here, I'll just make a big blue circle. If I repeated it here, I could get really, really good cell phone calls. And they sounded like they were sitting in the room with you. So what we did was our voice calls, our cell phone calls, we used 2 time slots. On the 3 to 1 interleave. 1, 2, 3, repeat. But our dispatch calls, because those were simplex communications, hey man, and you unkey, we could get 6 of them in the same spectrum. This is what your phone carriers are doing to you today. They're digitizing the snot out of this stuff and parking it in time slots. Now, if you're a Verizon customer, I'm not even going to write this on the board. They use code division mobile access, and after about 16 and a half years of your life understanding Welsh codes, you will still not understand how the freaking thing works. It's FM. It is freaking magic. Okay? Just saying. You want to have that discussion, I'm going to leave, because I don't do CDMA. So we have, you're going to see things in publications and the radios. So you're going to see TDMA. I'm just going to write these down here in the corner. TDMA. You're going to see CDMA. Anybody seen that on their phones? And there's one more. And that's not fire department multiple access. That's frequency. Frequency division multiple access. And all that is saying, I'm going to have one guy talk over here on this freak and one guy talk on this freak. It's not the same stupid system. It's just somebody's idea. And what you'll find if you look into DMR Tier 1 and Tier 2, you're going to see in Tier 1 FDMA. Remember I said a while ago to be able to use time slots, you had to have a synchronizing signal. Remember that? So the repeater has to do that. In Tier 1, there are no repeaters. So how does the radio know what to do? It has no clue what time slot it's on, because there's not a timing reference. How it works is, it's simply a digital signal eating up a full channel. It transmits on both time slots. So somebody got the bright idea that, well, then that must be frequency division mobile access. And, you know, they could probably make an argument. So when you see that, since we talked about modulation and modulation types tonight, breaking things up in digital time slots is valid. Sir?
Is it mobile or multiple?
Multiple.
It's multiple.
Okay, this is multiple here. Time division multiple access. But DMR is digital mobile.
Radio. Yeah. And if you go, well, my phone's GSM. Okay. So then you're just a European snob and believe in general cellular mobile. Sir?
So why don't we do frequency hopping?
We don't do frequency hopping because that requires a known interval. I can't get 2 hams to agree on what we're having for lunch. So in an answer, that's why we don't do free copy. Now, maybe one day we'll have a conversation about encrypting things beyond belief. Remember, you know the big briefing room in the ninth, the huge one that's got all the whiteboards if you open them up? Or they had them that way 25 years ago. I can tell you, that conversation took 3 of those boards.
Hey, Tom,
Sir?
who was credited with the invention of frequency hopping?
Lord, dude, I don't know. I don't study history of radios.
Actress Hedy Lamarr.
Hedy Lamarr.
No kidding.
Really? You'll find some people throughout history had interesting bad habits and really bad associations. If you're from my generation, you remember Chuck Barris's Gong Show.
Yes.
Look it up. Okay, so this takes us into some interesting things. So, let's clean this out of the board up. Okay, George mentioned something very easily a while ago, and I kind of had to put him in park. Because he said a little acronym called SDR. Okay, anybody want to venture a guess? Hams are excluded. Anybody want to venture a guess what SDR is? I will tell you the R is radio. I figured that, didn't you? Anybody want to guess on SD?
Super duper.
It's not super duper. Thanks for playing, bud. I appreciate that. Did I blow it? Spelling error? Okay. I'm ultra conscious of spelling errors because trust me, I make some good ones some days. Spell check is my friend. Software defined radio. What we have found is we can build really cool circuits that can mimic radios. Basically do all of the circuits in a radio we can do in a chip now. Okay, the trick is we got to tell it who it is. Hence the software defined part. So we can take a software defined radio module and tell it that today you're an AM transmitter and an AM receiver when you unkey. You know, we can make it a digital only radio. We can tell it what frequency it operates at and everything in between. Now, we talked about something last week that needs to be mentioned when we talk about software-defined radios. Anybody remember the 2 S's from receivers? There was 2 words that begin with S that are very important. That is not right. Selectivity, I guess it is. Close enough. Close enough. Y'all remember those 2 S's? Were they in your notes? It worked?
My guess was off.
Bummer! Okay, that's okay. That's not even related to Dungeons and Dragons either, I promise you that. Selectivity and sensitivity. Let's talk about sensitivity. What do you think sensitivity is in a receiver? Hang on. I know you know what this is, so you and Ed are excluded from this conversation for just a second. Okay? So, sensitivity could be that, well, you're sensitive. Sometimes you can filter and make things more selective. Okay? So, sensitivity is a radio's ability to hear. The higher the sensitivity, the greater that radio will perform. The receiver of it, the receiver side only. So selectivity says that we can ignore adjacent channel noise. Okay, and this is a trade-off in every receiver ever built, including software-defined radios, is you can't have both of them wide open. You remember the old thing, faster, cheaper, better, you can only have 2 of the 3? Well, there ain't a third in this, and you're never going to get enough of either. So it's always a trade. So software-defined radios, because they have this ability to cover massive amounts of spectrum and maximum amount of modes, they're not as sensitive, and they're clearly not as selective. Okay? One of the children that really probably started as the infamous software-defined radio is Mr. Baofeng, Mr. Chinese Radio. Yeah, I own 2 of them. Do I recommend them? No. This is the noisiest, trashiest radio on the planet. Does it work? Yeah. Works pretty good. But you can ride through Sumter, Columbia, or Camden for that matter, and you will constantly hear noise. Every time you go down a street, you'll hear all kind of artifacts and noise and stuff. And the reason is, these things aren't selective as nothing. Sensitivity's not bad. You know, I can sit on my front porch, you know, almost in Richland County and listen to anybody in Sumter. But the problem is, if I'm between 2 guys and they're on different frequencies and they're having a conversation, I'm fighting to figure out who I want to listen to today. And quite honestly, I may not be able to listen to either one of them. Okay, so this radio may have good sensitivity. Selectivity sucks. But what do you want for $39? Not only that, I charged this battery the last time we had a hurricane activation. And it still works. Yeah. Still works. Amazing.
It also works on the transmitter end too, it puts out a sloppy signal.
Yeah, so
So the selectivity, if the sensitivity is the clear, the selectivity is the ability to what?
well, actually, the sensitivity is to be able to hear distant and weak signals.
Okay.
So selectivity will be able to narrow down one conversation from another in a simple term. Okay. Software-defined radios are great. They can do a lot of things. Any of you guys play with Raspberry Pis, the sky is the limit. You can figure out either that or Arduino and those guys. Yeah. You know, you can use those little, yeah. Everybody know what we're talking about when we talk about those? Let me hold on, George.
That's a Raspberry Pi computer
Yeah.
with a radio board attached to it.
So basically, this is a Raspberry Pi. It's a little itty-bitty computer. Okay? The little whiteboard in there is a little RF board. A little antenna. Here, we'll pass that around. Now look at it. If you drop it, you can talk to George later. So basically, you know, we're using this to, what would you call that, George? You're actually providing a gateway into hotspot for radio traffic. Big thing to remember with software-defined radios is they'll do a lot of things, just like I was going with the Raspberry Pi. They may not do it well, but they do it good enough. Okay, so the good enough may be one of those things that may appeal to you. Okay, let's catch up with what we're doing. Okay, anybody seen the term PTT? Push to talk. Sometimes our acronyms are really silly in the ham radio world. But the push to talk button, the PTT, okay? So on a microphone, it's literally DOS button on the side. Sometimes our stuff has up and down. And what it'll do is change your tuning. You can scroll up or scroll down. And sometimes that's handy if you don't want to take your hand off the steering wheel to reach in the floor to change frequency. Okay, covered that. So much like, I'm just making sure now that I'm hitting the things on the list. So much like our sensitivity and our selectivity, we have, you know, spurious emissions, harmonics, things that are generated that get out that are outside of what we're trying to operate on. So on the transmitter side, you have the same thing. So just like with selectivity being able to narrow in, we want our transmitters to have very low spurious emissions, which is outside of that spectrum, you know, outside in here. We don't want to be out there, okay? So just if that term pops up, you know exactly what it is. Okay, other little switches and stuff on there. Man, some of these things are stupid simple, but they're going to be test questions. And it almost pains me to think about these. But just so you've seen it and you've heard about it. AF for audio frequency versus RF. Okay? You will find on there is a volume control called AF and an RF power output called RF. And they are variable. Does anybody know what a squelch circuit is or what a squelch does? Okay, go for it.
It allows you to tune out of noise.
Not really. Noise is proper. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to draw, we got a nice little chain link fence here. And then right here I got a pole, another pole here, and I got the chain link fence. And this thing in here is gate. And it swings like that. Everybody seen a gate and a fence? Okay? Squelch is a gate. Okay? All we're doing is closing that gate. We'll close that gate and let the noise through. Okay? Because when the gate is open, nothing passes, right? If audio is going this way. Okay? If that gate's open and there's not a connect point in there, it doesn't work. But when this gate swings closed, and is no longer open up here, what happens? Signal passes. So when we set that squelch level, all we're doing is opening that audio path or closing that audio path. Now where you would want that is if you're sitting there a long period of time and you got a couple of friends and they're just sitting there chewing the fat and trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. You may find that the noise that particular time may be just a distraction, and they got really good signal. So what I can do is increase that squelch to where I cut off the background noise, and I just hear those guys when they key up. That's terribly important on FM, more so than on HF, because on FM, sideband rather. So when you get up into UHF and VHF stuff, you can sit there and just listen to all night long. Or you can set that to where when something breaks the squelch, it opens it so you can hear people talking. That's what you want to listen to, right? Okay, so that's all squelch is a noise gate. So you were right on noise, but we just have to think of it like the old chain link fence gate. Okay, AGC. Since we're in terminology hell tonight, I will tell you that it is control. And that G is gain. And of course that's automatic. Or as a buddy of mine in Atlanta says, automagical. Okay. And all AGC does is compress the peaks and the valleys and just kind of brings it up more uniform. Think of an automatic gain. So a device in the radio is trying to bring that to some average. Okay? Quiet. Everybody good? Covered a lot of ground tonight. Please go back and reread the chapter. With any luck, we'll get this video posted and you can watch it again. I know I babbled a lot tonight. There was a lot of stuff thrown out tonight. If you missed the antennas or you have questions about antenna theory, the video's up. The week before that, when we were doing components and schematic stuff, the video's up. Everything but week 2 is basically up. Week 2, we kind of recap again in 3, 4, and 5. We have the videos up on the site where you can go click them on YouTube. Hopefully tonight, week 6 will be in there. Next week, we finish all the theory. The week after that, which is week 8, we're going to review from beginning to end just to make sure that if you have questions, and what I'd like you to do by then is try to carve out the time in advance for you to take the practice test. You can go online, and there's practice tests online where it'll throw you the questions. You just click on the multiple choice answer, see how you did. Because what I'd like to do in week number 8, the week before we test, is I would like you to come into class having taken a self-test, whether the one in the book, because there's one in the end of the book, or the one online, and be honest with me about what you missed. Because if each of you are honest with me with what you missed, I promise you what we'll find at the end of the night is you're not alone. Okay? It may be something that I said or I alluded to that I didn't fully develop. Okay? For this, I've taught this many, many times. I've been able to regurgitate this not being conscious since I was probably 16, 17 years old. So I'm going to pass over things that are critical for you to learn that I may have thought I said and I didn't. So please, by the time we finish next week's class, set aside some time to do the self-test and figure out where you're at. Because I really want everybody to get a license out of this. My end game is when the night we test in here, please do not run off real fast, because some folks test faster than others. What I'd like to do is get a group photo with all of you that pass. We'll get one for the class, and then we'll get one, everybody holding up their little, what's the form they get, George, that said they passed?
CDSC or something.
You get something from the VE people. I haven't done VE in forever. It's been a long time since I've tested for anything. But what I want to do is I want to get everybody to, because a lot of you guys live out of town. We'll take the family group shot, and I'm going to stick it on our club Facebook page, because dang it, I'm proud to have new hands.